Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Solo ReacTalk. This evening, I'm going to be reacting to a video requested by multiple people. It's on the Fredrik Knudsen YouTube channel. It's called The Austrian Wine Poisoning Down the Rabbit Hole on the Fredrik Knudsen YouTube channel. Yes, if you guys want to check out my previous reaction to... oh no, what was it called again? I think it was called Rat Utopia, right? Yeah, I'll put the video link. Well, in fact, I'm going to create a playlist card for Fredrik Knudsen videos because I have a lot of requests for Fredrik Knudsen videos. So I'm going to compile them all in a playlist reaction, and you'll find the playlist reaction at the top right here. Yes. If you guys want to check out the original video as well as Fredrik Knudsen's YouTube channel, the links are going to be in the description below. And yes, let us start with the Austrian wine poisoning down the rabbit hole. 3, 2, 1, go.
While known to many from the most affected areas, the 1985 Austrian wine poisoning is often a hazy memory to those in Europe and entirely unknown to those outside of it. When asked about it, people will mention the unwitting consumption of hazardous chemicals and a mass public panic, but the details will be muddled or contradictory. Most sources with precise information are left untranslated, and misinformation about the event is commonly repeated through English publications. So what was the Austrian wine poisoning?
You know, in South Africa we had a listeriosis bacteria outbreak on our polony. Our polony was infected, or should I say it had the listeriosis bacteria. It was due because the business that was creating the polony didn't follow the proper procedures in, making sure that the polony is not having this bacteria, and thus customers consuming it and falling ill and even dying. So around 200 people died, if I'm not mistaken, from the listeriosis outbreak. And it was big news in our country. It also probably affected our neighboring countries because we don't only supply, or should I say the businesses in South Africa don't only supply polony in South Africa, but they also supply to our neighboring countries. And it was a big story during 2018, 2019, if not mistaken. And yeah, around 200 people died, 1,000 people were in hospital. And yeah, it was a very traumatic and scary time because a lot of people eat polony and ham, even including myself. So there was a time that we were very apprehensive in acquiring polony or ham from our supermarket stores or anywhere where they're being sold, because we were not sure whether we were going to live the next day. So yeah, in that situation, I think they tried to keep it, the business tried to keep it a secret about what was happening. They tried, but then of course our authorities tracked down where the listeriosis outbreak originated from, and yeah, there were some repercussions and consequences that the business and those who were handling the polony, those people went through the criminal justice procedure. So I think something similar is going to happen here with this Austrian wine poisoning, where the businesses are going to keep it under wraps. The fact that there are some chemicals being used in the wine that they should not be there. And I don't know if people died. I don't think Fredrik did state that people died. But yeah, this is something that businesses tend to do, especially when they're extremely greedy or desperate. They cut corners. They try to make solutions out of dangerous substances, and it is us, the consumers, that are going to suffer.
During the 1980s, Austrian wine had a reputation in Germany as a cheaper alternative to domestic and Italian wines. Often found in grocery stores, these wines were made specifically to meet the high demand for sweetness from German consumers, and the sweetest wines could consistently be priced the highest.
Interesting. I thought maybe they would also acquire French wine. I hear that French wine is very, noticeable, and it's top class type of wine. I don't know if it's sweet wine in particular. I'm not really a wine expert. All I know is that the French make very good wine, apparently. So yeah, interesting that the Italians and the Austrians also make wine.
The chief difference of Austrian wine, however, was that much of the industry had been arranged for mass production. First, vineyards would leave the grapes on the vine as long as possible, allowing them to ripen. If left for long enough, the producers would gain the legal right to label their bottles as the sweet and lucrative Predikatswein. These ripened grapes would be harvested in late summer and shipped to manufacturers who would ferment the grapes in large vats. The resulting wine would then be transported to bottlers in bulk. The relatively high quality achieved by this process allowed Austrian winemakers to undercut the prices of older, smaller-scale wineries who were more established, and mass production made for a more reliable source of wine. But after years, this production grew from prosperous to suspicious. During the 1970s, the amount of Predikatswein being produced surpassed feasibility, and Austrian investigatory bodies began seeking warrants to test this mass-produced wine in order to discover precisely how these seemingly impossible numbers were being achieved.
If the production is surpassing feasibility of how much can be produced on a farm and then gone through the entire chain of development for the final product, then definitely there is something going on. Either they're adding some sort of chemicals into the wines to make more of it, or they're adding water. I think that might dilute the wine, if I'm not mistaken, right? It might dilute it. So, yeah, also adding in chemicals just to give it that taste of wine, sweet wine in particular. Yeah. Like I said, greed can take you places.
Evidence incriminating particular wineries, however, the courts refused to grant these warrants. Even if they could investigate, the Austrian authorities were understaffed and overworked, allowing the wine industry in the country to operate largely unchecked and unsupervised. In one instance, a wine merchant arrived at a cooperative with his tanker to collect wine, but as they were pumping wine into the truck, the man noticed that they had attached a second hose. Investigating further, he found that they were pumping water into the truck as well.
Wow.
Enraged, the man refused to take the wine and approached the Austrian wine control, who told him that they would be unable to begin inquiries for another 6 weeks due to the massive amount of work they already had to perform.
What massive amount of work exactly? Like you're also, checking on other businesses that, are in the supply chain for making wine? All right.
Finding this answer unacceptable, he then approached the Ministry of Agriculture, who revealed to him that there were only 18 inspectors tasked with overseeing approximately 60,000 companies.
Oh, okay. This just it explains it all. When they say that it'll take 6 weeks, now I understand why. Just 18 inspectors over 60,000 companies, and I'm sure this is the entire chain of of the production line of making wine. It's not just the farms. It's not just the process of making wine and bottling of the wine. It's all of it, all at once. Interesting.
With such a state of affairs, there was little question that adulteration of wine, especially Predikatswein, had become widespread. In 1975, the Chamber of Labor and Employees in Salzburg, Austria, performed both chemical tests and expert taste tests on 76 different bottles of Austrian wine.
Expert taste tests. I'd want to be one of those. My job is to taste wine and I get paid. Oh my gosh. I'm not really a big alcoholic type of person, and I have drank wine before, red wine and white wine. I'm like I said, I'm not really a big fan of such alcoholic beverages and such things. But if it was a job, I wouldn't mind. I would not mind. I just go to work, get into the office, and then drink wine, and just have a score test to say that okay, no, this one is nice, this one is good, or this one is better. It's recommended to be sold to the public. Oh man, then I'm done for the day. I clock out. I get my money at the end of the month. That's a nice job.
Of them, only 23 were properly labeled and 56 were defective. But what investigators couldn't have known was precisely how large the problem had grown or how far winemakers would go to make a profit.
So this was not just contained in one business that was cutting corners and adding water into the wine. This is something that is an industry-wide situation.
On December 21st, 1984, an unknown man with a German accent entered the Federal Institute of Agricultural Chemistry in Vienna and placed a bottle full of liquid on the table, declaring that inside of this bottle was the chemical being used to produce such vast quantities of wine. He then exited the building, leaving the bottle on the table. He was never identified. After a month of analysis, chemists were able to determine that the bottle contained numerous chemicals, several of them toxic.
Oh, where would we be without this whistleblower? Whistleblowers are very important. Very, very important. Where the authorities cannot find any situation, whistleblowers are our last line of defense, I would say. And they should always be protected. And luckily this man, he just dropped off the material and he left. Because, sometimes you can't trust the authorities. Sometimes you want to tell the authorities the truth that I work at such and such company, I am responsible for this, and, I just had to come and tell you guys that my business or the business I work for is using these chemicals in the product that is being consumed by the customers. Your life is under threat. The moment you start saying stuff like that, your life is under threat. People who are greedy and powerful will try to kill you, to silence you as soon as possible. And if they have connections in government, it's even worse. No one is going to know how you died. It will just be a mysterious death. So, yeah, this whistleblower, he was brave. He was brave.
This tip wasn't enough to investigate any winery in particular. It meant that they knew what tests to apply if given the opportunity, and this would come less than 2 months later. In mid-February of 1985, another tip was sent from someone inside the Austrian wine industry to government officials, a tip that seemed too ridiculous and brazen to be believed. A factory owner was purchasing large amounts of a chemical, one of the chemicals from the mysterious bottle, and attempting to write it off on his taxes as a business expense, claiming that it was all to be used for his small tractor. After inspecting the documents, this blatant discrepancy proved enough to obtain a warrant, and a chemical investigation team was sent. Upon their arrival, they confiscated the wine being stored in the vats and sent samples back to a laboratory. Soon, their suspicions were confirmed. The wine contained significant amounts of diethylene glycol. Diethylene glycol is typically used as a solvent or combined with other chemicals to make numerous liquids such as brake fluid and wallpaper stripper.
Brake fluid and wallpaper. Oh my gosh. You guys are drinking brake fluid? Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. So what, they're adding this substance into the wine, diluted with water, and it gives some sort of sweet taste, because that's what the market is demanding, sweet wine in particular, especially the German market. And since these Austrian wine businesses are supplying the German market with sweet wine, I'm sure these chemicals that are being used, along with water, is giving this sweet effect in this diluted wine. Okay.
Its effect on humans, however, is brutal. After ingestion, diethylene glycol enters the bloodstream, where it is transported throughout the body and takes destructive effect in two particular ways.
Hold on. I need to get the name of this substance correctly. Diethylene glycol. All right.
Diethylene glycol is typically used as a solvent or combined with other chemicals to make numerous liquids such as brake fluid and wallpaper stripper. Its effect on humans, however, is brutal. After ingestion, diethylene glycol enters the bloodstream, where it is transported throughout the body and takes destructive effect in two particular ways. The first, and better understood, is its interaction with the liver and the kidneys. When diethylene glycol enters the liver, it is metabolized into two new chemicals, 2-hydroxyethoxyacetic acid and diglycolic acid. When the latter of these encounters the tubules of the kidneys, it enters the cells and damages the mitochondria, causing necrosis, or literally, cell death.
Oh gosh.
If enough of the kidney is damaged, it can no longer adequately filter toxins out of the blood, a condition called renal failure.
You'll have to go for dialysis.
This eventually leads to metabolic acidosis, where the blood becomes too acidic for the body to use. The second and more poorly understood effect is that on the nervous system. Through mechanisms apparently still unknown, ingestion of diethylene glycol causes damage to the myelin sheath and axon of nerve cells, making them unable to properly carry electrical signals. Unchecked, this can lead to permanent paralysis, either partial or complete. Studies of people affected by diethylene glycol showed that nearly every single neuron was damaged by the poisoning to some degree, though the amount.
So imagine you'll be paralyzed and your kidneys are going to fail. Hey.
Found in this wine were small enough not to cause acute poisoning. Long-term consumption can cause the same effects and lead to organ and brain damage. While adding diethylene glycol to wine was unorthodox, the reasons for doing so were easy to glean. Wines with added sugar were worth less, and tests were often performed to make certain that no additives were being used without proper labeling. This meant that, to sweeten wine without reducing profits, another chemical would have to be used, one that was more difficult to detect. Diethylene glycol was poorly understood at the time, the tests for it were rudimentary, and most importantly, it was sweet. In small enough amounts, the effects of poisoning could be minimized while adding a noticeable amount of sweetness, body, and aroma, and if someone did suffer the effects of poisoning, it would be difficult to trace the source back to the wine.
And how is it that these wine companies were able to find out about this diethylene glycol? How were they able to find about this chemical? And they really thought they could get away with this. Greed.
By this method, wine cellars could enhance lower quality wine to mimic Predikatswein. At the time, the chemical investigation team assumed that this was an isolated incident, limited to cheap, mass-produced wine, but as the weeks progressed, this optimistic assumption proved drastically incorrect. With this wine confiscated, investigators began searching for more wineries who may have performed similar adulteration, but as they did, a parallel incident began occurring across Austria. The bacterial colonies used in sewage treatment facilities were suddenly and inexplicably collapsing, and untreated sewage was flowing into the rivers and devastating their ecosystems.
There must be too much diethylene glycol in the sewage system as well. I don't know whether it's from the people who've been drinking it and, the urine and the waste. Oh, yeah, let me just say the waste. The human waste is now filled with this diethylene glycol, or it's companies dumping, their wine down into the river systems or into the sewage, trying to, cover up the evidence.
It didn't take long to discover what was causing this. Despite attempts at secrecy, knowledge of the investigations had leaked to the wine industry, and now, other wineries who had been sweetening their wine were desperately dumping it into the sewer to hide it from the investigators.
And how is it that they knew about the investigation? It means they have people in the government institution. They have people who have their back in the institution, or should I say in the government institution. And like I said with the whistleblower, if he, exposed himself and told the authorities who he is, where does he work, he was going to be in trouble. So it's good that he just dropped off the evidence and he left. He didn't say anything else. Being a whistleblower can be very dangerous. Very dangerous. Very brave people.
However, the diethylene glycol in the wine had the effect of killing the bacterial colonies in the water treatment plants, and thereby unintentionally broadcasting their actions. Investigators were forced to scramble in order to find these wineries before they could destroy their tainted wine. After raiding a few cellars from winemakers in Burgenland, they quickly discovered that it wasn't only the cheap wine that had been affected. Both cheap and expensive winemakers were adding diethylene glycol to their wines in order to sweeten it. By this point, it was apparent that secrecy was no longer possible. On April 23, 1985, the Austrian government announced the discovery to the public and issued a health warning against Predikatswein. 2 days later, approximately 2 million liters of wine were confiscated to await laboratory testing. However, it would take some time for the laboratories, with their limited resources, to finish their tests. Over the following months, these tests would reveal just how deeply this poisoning had rooted itself in the Austrian wine industry, and how it had been exacerbated by ignorant bodies secretly performing their own actions independently.
So, what do you do with all of this wine that is contaminated? Where do you throw it away? Like, do you throw it into the sewage as well, or what? The ocean? I mean, that's a lot of wine.
While there was little news over the next few months, those chemists tasked with testing the wine were understaffed, overworked, and woefully disorganized.
I mean, you can imagine, only 18 inspectors, and even other government institutions, they're not prepared for something like this. And an industry of, 60,000 companies? 60,000. Imagine.
In some instances, a single sample of wine was tested 100 times due to poor communication, and the number of samples had ballooned so quickly that testing all of the wine became impossible with contemporary methods, with or without proper organization. These chemists also realized that, since the government had announced their investigation, the poisoners now had the opportunity to hide their work by diluting the affected wine before it could be confiscated. And so, the chemists settled on a different plan. They would develop new methods of testing. After only 3 months of dedicated work, they were able to increase the sensitivity of the tests by 4,000%, so that 5 milligrams of diethylene glycol could be detected in 1 liter of wine. But perhaps more importantly, these tests could be completed in as little as 5 minutes, making the task
Ooh, that's impressive.
of testing much more expedient. Over time, more people in the wine industry were implicated, and their wines were placed on a blacklist. With the
I don't just want these people's wines to be put on a blacklist. They need to be arrested. These companies and their directors and whoever else is involved in these types of situations, they need to be arrested. Because people can die. People can, become paralyzed. They can have kidney failure. This is a life or death situation.
revelation of this poisoning, doctors were finally linking illnesses to Austrian wine consumption. On July 11th, multiple cases were reported in the newspapers. One was of a 36-year-old man who had bought 50 bottles of Predikatswein to fill his cellar and decided to drink some of it.
Like, couldn't you choose other wines? Why 50 of the same wine? Like, you must be a very big fan.
That same night, he began suffering from stomach cramps and his body began shaking. Another man drank a bottle of Predikatswein over the course of a number of evenings, until eventually he started vomiting and suffering from kidney stones. The following day, July 12th, a report was released about a family who had gathered for their 77-year-old grandmother's birthday party, and the 11 adults all shared bottles of Predikatswein.
Man, the Austrian wine was really loved, really well supported by the public. Whether in Austria or Germany, they loved this product from Austria. Definitely. Not only because it's affordable, but because, it's sweet wine. And probably it must have had a unique sweetness to it because of the diethylene glycol chemical inside it. Yeah.
By the next day, each of them was feeling nauseated and dizzy. Another case emerged later that month, which was far more dire. 4 years before the tests for diethylene glycol began, a retired German man had been on vacation near Vienna, where he drank large amounts of sweet wine, then bought another several liters to take back home with him to Munich. During his return journey, however, he began suffering from severe kidney pain and nausea, for which he was admitted to the hospital. There, his condition worsened until finally, his liver failed completely.
Oh no. Well, yeah, it failed, but I'm sure they had dialysis machines during those times, right? In the 1980s? Or maybe I'm wrong about that.
Doctors were able to deduce the cause of his illness, glycol poisoning, which had come from the large amount of wine he had ingested. The newspapers initially reported him as the first confirmed death of the poisoning, but this was refuted a few days later when the man provided an interview to a competing newspaper in which he dryly noted, "I am fine now," and recounted his poisoning from 4 years prior. This last report revealed a concerning fact. At first, it was believed that the usage of diethylene glycol was much smaller in scope. This event showed that wineries have been adding the chemical to their wines for over 5 years, and as laboratories continued testing, this scope only widened. The oldest bottle discovered with the chemical was bottled in 1976, meaning that this had been occurring for nearly a decade at the least.
Wow. And they really thought they could get away with it. Well, they did, for a very long time. For a very, very long time, they've gotten away with this. Oh, wow. And this is like a secret within the industry. It's not something that you just tell out in public saying that, we also add in chemicals to our wine to make it sweet, to make it a unique sweet taste for the consumer. No, they don't tell anyone this. This is an inside, a business secret. You have to be in the business to know about it. And I'm sure even government officials also knew about this. I'm sure there's no way that, the government authorities that are responsible for oversight over this industry did not know that something like this was happening. I'm sure there were some government officials who knew, but of course they were paid to keep silent, to cooperate, to turn the other cheek, as they say, yeah.
Then, on July 19th, it was revealed that a single bottle of ice wine contained 16 grams of diethylene glycol in it, enough to sicken an adult and kill someone susceptible to it. That same day, advertisements appeared in numerous newspapers internationally, purchased by the Austrian Wine Propaganda Office, who were desperate to salvage what public goodwill they could.
Wine Propaganda Office. Wow.
Fritz Hallgarten, in his book Wine Scandal, translates it so: "No pardon against the black sheep of Austrian viticulture. Criminal investigations have been initiated. Already on April 23, 1985, the authorities took all precautions. All wines found to be adulterated were confiscated. Official report of the Austrian Wine Control. 52,790 Austrian growers, 1,582 Austrian wine merchants, and 52 viticultural cooperatives produce wine under the strictest official control of quality." These statements, however, were obviously hollow to the public, who had grown wary of Austrian wine as new batches were found to include diethylene glycol, and the blacklist continued to grow. As if to rebut the propaganda office, another bottle of wine was found to contain 45 grams of diethylene glycol per liter, almost 3 times as much as the ice wine, only
Man, what's up with these businesses? Do they really want to kill people? Oh, wow. Now it's like it's intentional. They want to kill you.
6 days after they released their advertisement. By the end of July, over 5 million liters of Austrian wine had been confiscated. However, German wine resellers didn't want to lose profits on their imports, and so they silently re-exported their Austrian wine to other countries who were still uninformed about the poisoning.
Oh, so they must die. Huh? Other people must die. Just because you don't want to lose your money. You're now putting the expenses upon other innocent people. People who don't know about what's happening on this investigation. That is despicable. That is just despicable.
Soon afterward, these countries placed similar bans, but only after numerous drinkers began to show symptoms of paralysis after drinking Austrian wine. In an odd quirk of linguistic barriers, Japan and China also ordered a ban on the sale of Australian wine, due to the similarity of the countries' names. In the course
Seriously? Austria? Australia? You guys didn't go to geography lessons? You don't know where Australia is? You don't know where Austria is? I mean, sure, okay, yes, they might sound similar, but it's Australia. Austria. One is in Europe. One is in Asia.
of testing this wine, numerous other scandals were inadvertently discovered, such as the fact that much of the wine market wasn't wine at all, but a special concoction named Kunstwein, which tastes remarkably similar to actual wine, yet contains no grapes. Supposedly, one company was making 100,000 liters of it every month. Around 1980, Kunstwein makers had begun adding diethylene glycol as well.
This is going to kill the wine industry in Austria. Their reputation will be destroyed from something like this. Amazing.
But other scandals were of much more dire consequence, and one explained the devastating effects that some people were experiencing from the glycol. One of the known treatments for diethylene glycol poisoning is ethanol, better known as the alcohol normally found in drinks. Ethanol reacts with the same liver enzymes as diethylene glycol, and if the enzymes are occupied by the ethanol, then the glycol can pass through the liver without being transformed into the toxic diglycolic acid, whereafter it is safely expelled from the body. This meant that, ideally, the ethanol in the wine would help counteract the toxicity of the diethylene glycol, and likely did in many cases. However, the laboratories discovered that some wineries were adding more substances alongside the glycol, most prominently, sugar. Sugar has the opposite effect as ethanol, instead increasing the toxicity of the diethylene glycol and working against whatever safety the ethanol may have provided. As this was being discovered, another newfound scandal was taking place in Germany. After diethylene glycol was found in wines that had been exported, Austrian winemakers claimed that German wine distributors were the ones who must have added the chemical after importing it, despite the clear.
Why would the distributors add more chemicals or substances into the wine? Why would they do that? They are distributing the product. They are not making the final product. That's your job. That's where it stops with you guys in Austria.
Evidence to the contrary. To refute these claims, the German government tested German wines, surmising that if this adulteration was being performed by these companies, it was unlikely that they would limit it to only Austrian wines. During testing, however, something odd was discovered. Some bottles showed small amounts of diethylene glycol, much smaller than what was in Austrian wines. At first, these German wine distributors suggested that diethylene glycol could occur naturally during fermentation.
Really?
Or perhaps in the pesticides used on the grapes.
Hey. Okay.
Chemists quickly refuted these possibilities. Then they attempted to blame the Austrian wines for contaminating their tanks, but these lies were thin. Such contamination would only result in trace amounts of diethylene glycol, not the 20 to 30 milligrams that were appearing in these bottles.
Unbelievable. Two countries and the businesses that are situated in those two countries, you know, they've been doing this for more than a decade. And now that the secrets are coming out, they're blaming each other, they're pointing fingers. Oh, wow. I thought this was only an Austrian situation, but it seems like also the German companies are also in cahoots in this entire fiasco. Unbelievable.
The reason was simple and was admitted by multiple sellers. They had secretly been mixing their German wines with Austrian wines to enhance the flavor. In the meantime, the German government blocked 10 billion liters of wine from entering the country any further. But another revelation was perhaps more concerning. Toward the end of July, it was discovered that diethylene glycol had been intentionally added to grape juice at a concentration of 1 gram per liter. While this was
Man, even the kids are not safe. Nobody is safe from the greed of companies.
less than what was typically found in the affected wines, much less diethylene glycol is required to sicken children, and even if this amount wasn't enough to cause acute poisoning, ingestion over long periods of time could still cause organ and neurological damage, especially without the mitigating effects of ethanol. With vast amounts of information being revealed to the public in such a short time, the media began focusing on this wine adulteration more and more, and affected wine was given a name: antifreeze wine, after reporters somewhat inaccurately stated that the chemical being used was antifreeze. While diethylene glycol is used as such in rare cases, other chemicals are far more common for the purpose.
I like the advert. I think that's an advert, or is it a news segment that they're showing us here with the brake fluid, or and the wine bottles. Yeah.
Despite this, the name antifreeze wine
I mean antifreeze, not brake fluid, but antifreeze. Yeah, sorry.
became the common term. By this point, the scandal had become a major cultural event, and a polka was even created in its honor: Zum Wohl Glykol, or in English, Cheers to Glycol. With the public enraged, they began to demand answers to 3 questions in particular. How was the government involved? How had this happened in the first place? And why?
I'm telling you, the government has been involved since day one. They've known about this. There are some government officials who've known about this. They've been paid off to keep their silence.
Reporters began investigating how long the government had known about this adulteration, and they noticed a discrepancy. On May 10th, the Austrian government alerted German officials that contaminated wine had been exported to their country. However, while the German government warned about drinking wine in Austria, the public wasn't informed that wine for sale in Germany had been affected, meaning that German citizens were still unwittingly buying wine with diethylene glycol. What wasn't reported was that, on May 30th, the German wine investigators were ordered to stop taking samples, suggesting that somebody in the upper echelons of the German government wanted this poisoning kept a secret. It wasn't until July 9th, almost a month and a half later, that a warning was given to the public.
Like, how could you want it to be kept a secret when people could die? Hey.
Reason for these strange occurrences was soon discovered. As opposed to contacting the German federal state, the Austrian investigators informed the Ministry of Viticulture in Mainz, whose chief concern was the well-being of the importers rather than public health. Hoping to salvage the wine, they kept this information secret and sought counsel to discover how much diethylene glycol would be hazardous to a person's health, and planned to approach the minister of the federal state for permission to issue new licenses that would allow the sale of antifreeze wine. plan was to discover the maximum safe amount of the chemical and allow winemakers to mix the affected wine with clean wine to reach this predetermined limit. When this was discovered, the public outcry was massive, and many demanded the resignation of those attempting to allow the sale of the antifreeze wine.
I mean, the audacity. The audacity. Ah.
1 month after this revelation, one of the 3 people involved resigned, and the other 2 were transferred to other ministries.
And I'm sure they don't even touch this wine. They don't even touch it. But they're getting paid. They're getting paid by the wine businesses as well. They're getting paid in their job as a government official. They don't even touch this wine. Probably they're buying wine from Italy, or they're buying wine from France or from some other countries, but they're not going to be touching the wine that they are forcing down the throats of customers who don't know about this diethylene glycol amount in their wine.
But investigators had a more pressing concern: the discovery of how this had happened. The first step was determining likely perpetrators. Using diethylene glycol as an additive seemed almost insidious.
You see, this is the job I want. This is the job I want. You just come in there with a suit. You are ready for work. You start shaking that wine glass. That wine glass, and you just sip and like, okay, no, this one's nice. It's good. You know, then you give it a mark, and then you go home. That's it for today. Oh man, this is a nice job.
Genius. Not only did it enhance the flavor profile of the wine in profound ways, but it was also incredibly cheap and could be bought in bulk. What's more, detection had been difficult and time-consuming before the chemist's improvements, making it unlikely to be discovered, especially with the Austrian wine control so overwhelmed. The investigators reasoned that whoever had first conceived of this likely had some sort of background in chemistry.
Yeah, definitely. Because it's just weird that these companies would know about this chemical and how they would utilize this chemical in such an effective way in making their wine sweet, even after diluting it with water and other substances, you know, just to produce more wine, sweet wine for the consumer base. So definitely they had a chemist who understood this chemical, but you know, they took charge over the production of this wine with the chemical after they knew how to do it. They took over and they just exacerbated the issue. They made it become a very dangerous precedence and situation for the industry and for the public who are consuming their wine. You know, now they started adding more and more of this diethylene glycol to make their wines even more sweet and distinctive from other products that are being sold. Yeah, but definitely in the beginning there must have been a chemist involved in this.
Working off of this assumption, they discovered their prime suspect, a man named Otto Nadrasky. Nadrasky had spent time as a chemist and had later gone on to become a wine consultant for numerous large wine companies. He was promptly arrested, alongside dozens of others. Though many of these
that's him.
People had to be let go due to a lack of evidence, enough were detained that, as court hearings proceeded, the greater reasoning behind the scandal was made clear. During the 1970s, the climate of Austria was changing. Rain had become more frequent and temperatures were gradually rising, which had an effect on the grapes. As mentioned before, farmers wanted to leave grapes on the vine for as long as possible so that they could ripen and sweeten, but the extra rain was making the grapes plump up and fall off of the vine long before the end of the season, resulting in crops that were significantly more sour. In spite of this, production companies still had orders to fill. Many exporters had signed contracts with German importers for large quantities of sweet wine. A solution would have to be found, and so Otto Nadrasky got to work.
Wasn't there a clause in the contract, stipulating if there is environmental factors that might hinder the production of, sweet wine, then there should be some sort of recourse or some sort of alternative or other options on the table that could, make sure that the sale or the production of the sweet wine, yes, it might be of a smaller quantity, but that is due to environmental factors, and there should be no penalty, put on the expectations on these companies. There should be no penalty because it's an environmental factor. That's why the grapes are not produced in large quantities in terms of the sweet version of the grapes, and there needs to be some sort of alternative to the situation or a solution to the situation. But I guess they didn't have that.
As a chemist, he had stumbled upon the idea of using diethylene glycol as an additive, and so he experimented to find the correct balance so that the taste could be enhanced while avoiding detection. To aid this endeavor, he also added other chemicals that helped hide its presence and further enhance the taste of the wine. What's more, he discovered that diethylene glycol could hide the presence of added water, which would allow companies to dilute the wine and further increase their yield. Once he had ascertained the proper mixture, he handed the formula to the companies for whom he worked. From there, they sold their secret to other companies, and over the years, more and more wine producers began using this idea until approximately 15% of all Austrian wines had some amount of diethylene glycol in it. Some companies tweaked the formula to add even more glycol.
Yeah. Like I stated, after they realized the secret, they hijacked it and they started adding in more of this diethylene glycol and other chemicals, just to give it a far more sweeter taste, to make it more distinctive compared to other wines that are being sold.
This flippant usage of the chemical may have been due to a misunderstanding. While mass poisonings had occurred in other countries before, the toxicity of diethylene glycol was poorly understood, and in court, multiple wine merchants professed that they had researched diethylene glycol before using it and found no literature to suggest that it was poisonous. Therefore, they felt morally confident adding it to their wine, despite the inherent duplicity. When inspectors learned of this trick, producers frantically tried to hide their affected wine. The federal government had stated the names of the two companies that had initially been discovered using glycol, which gave their suppliers time to hide or destroy their wine. Some, as mentioned previously, had dumped theirs into the sewer, but when this only broadcast their usage to the authorities, others realized that something else would have to be done. Wineries began to run their own tests in order to discover whether the equipment could detect the amount of glycol that they were using, hiding the results in neighboring businesses in case they were raided. By their calculations, they would need to dilute the affected wine with 10 parts unaffected wine in order to avoid detection, but this immediately became a problem. None of the wineries had that much unadulterated wine, and there was no way for them to know what other companies had added glycol to their product. If they bought from another winery, they risked making their wines even more toxic and having even more antifreeze wine in their possession.
You guys caught yourselves in one big trap of your own making. There's no escape. Come into the light.
In the end, this proved pointless as the chemists devised their new methods of detection and many of the culpable parties were arrested. Though court proceedings would take another 12 years, the scandal itself was finally over. But in the meantime, the rest of the wine industry was left to salvage what they could of their livelihoods. Even as countries lifted their bans on Austrian wine, consumer trust had been hopelessly destroyed. The government rushed new and stringent laws through legislation to ensure the safety of the wine and salvage the market, and one economist famously stated that everything would be resolved and forgotten in a year. His optimistic assessment was almost comically wrong. Within weeks of the media coverage, wine merchants were declaring bankruptcy. Even those companies who hadn't participated in the scandal were stigmatized, and Austrian wine was shunned internationally.
I mean, I'm thinking about Australian wine. Australians have got nothing to do with this. They are innocent. And all of a sudden, they're also banned by Japan and China. I feel sorry for them, you know. You just wake up one day and you're just being told your wine is laced with chemicals and we're banning your product. And then you're like, how? When did this happen? You know? Poor guys. Poor Australia.
Of note was that no wine growers had been implicated in the scandal, only fermenters and merchants, and yet many vineyards were forced to close permanently as the Austrian wine economy staggered and they could no longer sell their grapes, especially the lower quality ones. Those merchants who had participated.
So you can't just sell grapes to eat, you know, instead of focusing on the wine industry. Wouldn't it also be lucrative just to sell grapes to consume? I mean, grapes are delicious. They're very delicious, so why not focus on that market?
However, were indignant, and one defense lawyer blamed consumers for buying cheap wine without more careful consideration.
You're blaming No. You can't blame consumers.
These defenses proved ineffective, and many were given the maximum 10-year sentence. In the end, Austrian wine exports were down to less than 5% of where they had been only 1 year prior. Despite this, some of the companies at the center of the scandal managed to avoid bankruptcy. According to official records, nobody had been injured by the glycol, but this seems unlikely given the scope of the poisoning. In the meantime, the Austrian government was now left with the daunting task of destroying 270 million liters of contaminated wine, and their answer came from surprising sources: an electric power plant and a cement plant.
Electric power plant and cement? Huh.
In 1987, it was announced that technicians from the Österreichischen Traukraftwerke in Carinthia had devised a method for burning the wine to produce electricity. Similarly, a cement plant had retrofitted their furnaces to permit the use of wine as a coolant, and in this manner, all of the wine was gradually destroyed. With the
Wow. Okay. Interesting.
poisoning concluded, the country set about rebuilding their industry. Winemakers began a campaign to resist the harsh new quality control laws enacted by the government, arguing that the scandal wasn't caused by weak laws, but rather by a lack of enforcement. After they couldn't come
It's both weak laws and lack of enforcement. So the government needs to redouble its efforts in controlling this industry, making sure that it adheres to local and international standards, making sure that something like this never happens again.
to an agreement with lawmakers, multiple irate farmers threw salads at Günther Hayden, the agriculture minister. Still, the wine laws held. While the export market had been annihilated, the domestic market had survived, with sales somewhere between 90 to 94% compared to the previous year. This may largely be credited to the dedicated buyers of particular wineries, as well as the still thriving tourism industry. With the image of sweet wine tainted, wineries focused on cultivating grapes to make dry white wines, while wineries worked on reviving old traditional Austrian methods of production. Those winemakers who survived the scandal began taking even greater pride in their product, focusing on improving the quality as opposed to the quantity. This was encouraged by new wine colleges established across Austria with the express purpose of educating aspiring vintners. These colleges were tasked with educating and guiding a new generation of winemakers and merchants who embraced a wide variety of new ideas, adapting quickly to the changing tastes of consumers and enacting more sustainable growing practices, leading to the long-term positive health of wineries. For example, some new wine growers used a practice called Traubenausdünnung, where they would remove 50 to 70% of the grapes from the vine so that the remaining ones would receive more of the plant's nutrients and energy. While this resulted in less wine overall and was labor-intensive, the resulting product was of notably higher quality.
Quality over quantity is always good.
The scandal had also encouraged consumers to be more conscious of their purchases, and they began to take a greater interest in both the production process and the quality of the wine they were drinking, which in turn demanded a greater knowledge from producers and merchants. With time, and with the new winery practices, drinkers began to buy wine in greater amounts once again. This was bolstered by the confidence instilled by the new, stringent government policies. Every new bottle would be tested for composition and quality, and would be marked as approved with an excise stamp that included an identification number and date of inspection. It would be 16 years before the export market reached the levels of profit they once had, but by the time they did, their reputation had been radically altered. Though the modern Austrian wine market is much smaller than those of other countries such as Italy and France, they are renowned for their quality, and they are instantly recognizable thanks to the newly designed, distinctive red-white-red excise stamp on top of every bottle that signifies it as approved for export by the federal government.
That's nice. That's actually very nice. I wonder, do South African wine also have stamps like that? I'm not sure. But that looks nice.
After both chemical tests and a taste test. Inadvertently, the stamps had become a marketing tool. Today, the wine scandal is seemingly forgotten, replaced by modern acknowledgement of the universally high Austrian quality and enforced by what are often agreed to be the strictest wine laws in the world. Some winemakers still grumble about the brash stupidity of the old wine merchants who added diethylene glycol to their wine, but all will agree that, if the poisoning had never happened, Austrian wine would be drastically different, and most seem thankful for the prosperity that the modern wine industry is enjoying, with no need for added glycol.
Alright guys, that's it with the Austrian wine poisoning down the rabbit hole, made on the Fredrik Knudsen YouTube channel. like I stated before in the beginning, it's something that is very brave for people who are whistleblowers. You know, without them doing something about this in their own small little way, you know, in exposing the truth, none of this would have really taken off. None of these investigations, none of these inquiries into the wine industry would have taken off without these whistleblowers. I think there were about 2 of them, if I'm not mistaken. So yes, we have to give thanks to the whistleblowers, to those who took that step, that brave step, because, you know, their livelihoods was under threat. Their lives were also going to be possibly under threat. So if they didn't take this chance, many people would have suffered, I think. So yes, thanks to the whistleblowers for you know, getting the truth out there, no matter how, you know, small it might be, but it was out there and it lit a fire, and that fire consumed the lies and the double standards and the duplicitous actions of many of these businesses. It brought out the truth. It dragged all of these you know, businesses into the light, and that's what needed to be done, so that the Austrian wine industry could be cleansed of the sickness, of the corruption that has been occurring. And now, in the present day, they are succeeding. They are, you know, becoming a better product that is gaining the trust of the public again, not only locally but also internationally. So yes, this needed to be done. The new regulations, the new laws, the new standard, the new ways of making wine, not in quantity, but with quality, with precision, with care, with attention to detail, so that the consumers can trust that a lot of effort has been put into making this wine enjoyable. That's very good. That's very, very good. And it's just funny, you know, when, well, sad and funny at the same time, when you think about all of these companies that they know they're taking this risk, this chance on us, the consumers. They know that what they're using in their food or in their beverages might kill us. They know this, and yet they still forge ahead. They still try to cover it up. They still try to put the blame on other people. It's amazing how are they able just to sleep at night knowing that in their wine there are chemicals that could potentially lead any unsuspecting victim to their death. But they sleep happily. They still wake up with a smile. They still go to work, you know, walking confidently, getting money, you know, having television adverts with them holding their wine bottle, knowing that this thing is poison inside here. But they continue until the authorities start asking questions and the criminal justice procedure starts taking effect on their business and on themselves. Then all of a sudden they start to change, you know. They start to regret. Why did you not regret the first time when you started this business, in terms of adding in diethylene glycol and all these other chemicals and water? Yeah, greed will take you places. Greed will take you places, and you know, sometimes you will be so blinded by your ambitions and by your greed at the detriment or at the expense of other people, and it will, you know, kill your business. It will kill you. Maybe not literally, but, you know, in terms of your business, in terms of your life, it will die because of your greed and your ambitions. So yeah, it is something that many countries have to deal with, in terms of these businesses that cut corners, that use chemicals in their products that they sell to the consumers. There's a lot of governments, there's a lot of countries that need to have institutions that can oversight over these businesses to make sure that they are doing the right thing, that they are adhering to consumer protection laws and to environmental laws and to health laws that deal with food or other products that consumers use. So I think this is just another great example of what other countries and what other institutions have to do in terms of trying to make sure that businesses don't cut corners and bring people into a very dangerous situation because they're consuming products that could kill them. Like I said about the listeriosis outbreak we had in South Africa in terms of our polony, our government also did not have enough inspectors and oversight over companies that are producing food that we are eating. And thus it brought this situation of listeriosis spreading across the entire country. Because the company that was producing the polony did not adhere to health standards, did not adhere to the environmental factors or standards that are expected of them. And this bacteria grew in the polony production. 200 people dead. More than 1,000 people in hospital. That's bad. That's very, very bad. And in terms of the Austrian wine debacle, I don't know how many people died. Fredrik did say that the media stated that no one died, but we're not entirely sure about that. Especially because so many of these bottles of sweet wine were sold in 2 countries and also probably across the world. We don't know how many people, died due to the poisoning from these wines. But I'm sure there were people who died. We just don't know who they are, and not enough research has been put into that. But yeah, this was a very interesting, documentary focusing on corporate greed and the failure of government to protect the people. Instead, they're protecting businesses. And, finally, the criminal justice procedure, making sure that the truth is out, together with the media, also making sure that the people are informed about what's going on. And that's very important. Very, very important. All right, guys, that's it. Thanks again to all those who requested that I should react to the Austrian wine poisoning down the rabbit hole. It was very entertaining, very interesting to know about. Definitely, this is the type of history that, I would not focus on. I would not know about, in terms of Austrian wine poisoning. Really, this is something else. So yeah, it was really interesting to hear about it. And thank you also to Fredrik Knudsen for making this documentary. It was really, really good. I liked it. Guys, remember, if you want to check out the original video as well as Fredrik Knudsen's YouTube channel, the links are going to be in the description below. If you like my reaction, please give it a like, comment, and subscribe to my channel. Click on the notification bell if you want to be up to date with my latest videos. And I'll see you guys in my next reaction to Fredrik Knudsen's videos. Yes. Remember, there's going to be a playlist, and it's going to be at the top right here for my future reactions. Okay. Bye-bye.